Over this video, we will be covering the questions: can players expect to see content changes along with this rework in regards to boss fights? And will some bosses have their damage output lowered or raised to compensate for some of the changes incoming?
To go through boss fights, especially toward the end game, and create new phases or mechanics that create challenge without just being more damage. That is the part that's going to be probably the most exciting from the player perspective. I have got Hober and Fahrenheit signed up to create a short list of bosses that we want to touch up first in this respect. And we even have Ingendum offering to do some coding on the back end in case Hober and Fahrenheit come up with mechanics that we would really love to put in, but need a little extra. So we're trying to envision things where, for example, a boss does like a rapid fire attack, and if you get hit by every single shot in the burst, you die. It's not just based on damage, it's also based on the situation, right? The context. So that's just a real simple example of something we could do, but we want to be creative and come up with new types of mechanics with appropriate tells so the players can learn when to anticipate them, so that you have to be on your toes and it's not just about coming with the most resistant tank as possible.
Exactly the case. And my hope is that we can also find some way to convey to players who has the focus of an AI. I'm not sure exactly how we'll go about doing it, but just some way of knowing like who is the AI going to focus on, and who isn't, who is it not going to focus on.
Right. So again, that would play into the game allowing players to anticipate changes with visual tells.
You ask about bosses having their damage output lowered or raised to compensate. Yes, none of this is going to happen without an eye towards how it affects the experience of doing content together. And doing content together, invariably involves taking damage from a boss. And if some bosses do not do enough damage for this situation or the system that we're talking about, we will look to make them do more damage. Maybe not in direct damage through shooting a primary weapon at you, but we will look to make things that are not as challenging a little bit more challenging, and and on the inverse as well. Like if some things are too challenging as a result of these changes, like we will lower the boss's damage. We want to be as flexible as we can in regards to how we adjust things.
I'm fully expecting that some boss engagements will become much too high damage when we change healing to no longer be more than 100% efficient. And so my idea here is we'll get that on the test server so we can get a feel for exactly what the state of affairs is. And then we'll most likely reduce the damage coming in that zone. And in exchange for that damage reduction, we'll put in some more mechanics where the squad has to be on their toes. So in the end, you'll get a situation where healing is not just about this manufactured shields through cross heals. And the tank is now a much more active player, not just showing up with the most resilient ship they can find. And likewise for Shield Monkey, we'll then have like a clear view toward brainstorming how we want that class to be a little bit more engaged. But I would say I would expect boss DPS to go down rather than up in most cases, since we are going to be taking quite a lot of mitigation away from the squad in the form of that change to healing efficiency. One other point on this matter, we feel that right now the game is really squad-based berserkers to just go full resistance, and we'd rather for the game to kind of incentivize more of a middle ground. I totally understand why everyone builds these extremely resistant berserkers, because they have been necessitated by recent content. So it's kind of it's like a chicken and egg problem, right? Where developers have to make really high DPS bosses so that it's a challenge for you. And now you have to build really high resistance berserkers to do the bosses. And it's kind of like an out of control cycle. We want to disrupt and give you some breathing room so you can actually make more of a hybrid berserker setup that's not just all about the resistance and aggro, and still succeed in squad-based content.
Yeah, I think it would be really cool if the top end berserkers were the ones who were really risky in some situations and just decided I'm going to go with a full damage berserker setup and I'll get by with the healing that I have and just avoiding as much damage as I can.
That could end up being like a high skill ceiling type of tanking. Yeah. I don't know. I wouldn't go so far as to say that our vision is the most elite berserkers would be low tank, high DPS, but I do want you to feel like you can have some room to customize your setup and not just have to follow this cookie cutter pattern of maximum resistance and maximum hostility. Whether the change is going to be seen equally in the low to mid game content areas and the end game content areas kind of depends on some decisions that we haven't made yet. But most of the time when we talk about how we might want to change shield banks or shield regen, we're thinking of it in a scaling way so that the changes would be none or minimal to tech 0 content and scale up to a maximum difference at tech 22 or 23, depending on how we do the math. Well, adding to that, free-to-play content does not rely on cross heals to the same extent that endgame pay-to-play content does. So I think that as you go toward the end game, you rely a lot more on cross heals. You rely a lot more on specialized high resistance setups for berserkers, and it will be those zones that get the most that feel the most different. By comparison, I think that the zones that free to play have access to and the zones that new players have access to, let's say sub level 500, probably won't feel very different, since the changes we have in mind aren't as applicable to those zones. We will be regularly updating the community with the progress on this project, and we will be using the test server extensively for balance testing. I want to emphasize that since this is a kind of project that does require a lot of balance testing, not just, someone like me sitting down with a spreadsheet and hammering out all the new stats, we are going to use that test server for many iterations of the project, even well before it's ready for like a full test. So if you happen to just hop on the test server without us asking you to, you might find stuff in a really broken state. And we would always welcome your feedback in that situation. But I can assure you that if we haven't specifically come out there and asked you for your opinion, it might be because it's super broken right now and we're just kind of mulling it over to figure out how we want to change it. But for sure, the test server will be regularly used to try things out.